Welcome back, everyone, to this series of short conversations with people whose knowledge and experience will support your teaching and your organizing in the struggle for a free Palestine and the right to return, and against the ongoing U.S.-Israeli colonization, occupation, settlement, and genocide, a century in the making. Please, of course, come and go, join us as you can or wish over these 2 days. We have 5 people joining on Monday. I want to share quick thank yous again to Elon Dancy and Christy McGuire of the Center for Urban Education for collaborating to create this event, Nikaya Washington Butler, Fiona Seals, Kelly Runco, and Caitlin Zerker for tech support. My daughters, Cecilia, Carmen, and Satya, for quickly training me on social media. My dear friends and colleagues, Uju Agarwal and Lisa Ortiz, for helping generously in the shaping of these conversations. And everyone who helped to circulate this event widely as we were stalled by our institution. We had around 170 people registered before the institutional email finally went out this morning. So you all are amazing, and we thank you for being here today. I am Sabina Vaught, and I am so very grateful to be welcoming my friend and someone whose absolute, unwavering dedication to liberation is just an extraordinary model for all of us, Dr. Dylan Rodriguez. Dylan is a teacher, scholar, organizer, and collaborator who has maintained a day job as a professor at the University of California, Riverside since 2001. Dylan was elected president of the American Studies Association by his peers in 2020. And in that same year, he was named to the inaugural class of Freedom Scholars. A widely published, highly awarded scholar, Dylan's life work focuses on liberationist, anti-colonial, and abolitionist confrontations with the anti-Black, colonial, and white supremacist violences that permeate the ongoing civilization project. He's devoted to studying and teaching the historical collective genius of rebellion, survival, and insurgent futurity that radically challenge dominant forms of authority, power, and institutionality. He appreciates participating in all forms of collective study, thought, and planning that build capacities to survive and revolt against oppressive conditions. Dylan, we are grateful to be able to welcome you here today to do some of that capacity building work with organizers and educators in this struggle against genocide and for liberation.
Thank you, Sabina, as always, for inviting me. I want to make sure sound check that I'm sounding all right.
You sound great.
Hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Okay, good. Hey, nice to meet all you all virtually. As fraught as that is, I'm Dylan. He, him pronouns. I'm Filipino. I got short hair. Wearing a beige fake barong that's cheap. It's from the chunget. Filipinos here will know chunget is like the swap meat in the Philippines. So the cheap version of a barong, but still looks kind of cool. And I'm mostly have a look of gratitude on my face because Sabina's inviting me into the fight. So that's the thing I probably treasure the most. I need to put that in my bio from now on, that I treasure being invited into the fight. So this is where we are. And Sabina, I want to thank you and the whole team that just pulled us together to do this, I think, really urgent set of dialogues, conversations, and hopefully catalyzing activity and study together in these times of ongoing genocide. It's accelerated, yes, but it's an ongoing genocidal context that we're in. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think, we want to open it up for you to share your just extraordinary wealth of knowledge. I know you've been involved sort of intensively in talks and actions on this U.S.-Israeli genocide, longstanding occupation and colonization, and the movements for liberation. And so I don't know if you want to start with that work and share with us some of the things you think are important for organizers and educators to hear, to focus on, or take it in any direction you wish.
Yeah, I'll just share with you all the way I think entering this particular moment within this particular struggle. I believe that I am um, a mercenary presence in the best way. Like I don't mean that in a pathologizing way. I don't mean that in a pejorative way. I mean that in the I'm saying that we're in a condition of we're calling it genocide now. It's been genocide. I think it's time to say that because I'm hearing a lot of people who have for a long time refused to use conditions in which people are being neutralized and liquidated, and in some cases, that are now using the term genocide. So because of the profound conditions that we're observing happen in Gaza. The genocide's been an ongoing thing. It's been concentrated, accelerated. Now it's been an ongoing thing. This shit didn't just start 2 weeks ago. So as far as like I'm in a room with leaders of all kinds, I think we need to start teaching that. I think we need to start teaching number one that if we can understand that what is happening these last couple of weeks in Gaza is like it's an absolute atrocity. I think we need to try to resist relying on the language of human rights and the United Nations to describe what is happening, much less to seek some form of reparation for what's happening. I think we need to refrain from that. I think we need to use the language of liberation. It needs to be a language of liberation. We need to go back to the tools that many of us have cultivated over many years. For many of us, it's decades. We need to go back to Fanon. You know what I'm saying? We need to go back to Du Bois. We need to go back to Ida B. Wells. We need to go back to all of the revolutionary thinkers with whom we are most intimate and familiar, and take their fucking words seriously in various contexts. Understand the ways in which their militancy, their revolutionary commitment can and should be understood as portable, as translatable. And I'm not, I'm not saying that we need to conflate struggles here. What I am saying is that the militancy with which people are devoted to revolution and the messiness that happens within that militancy is something to be embraced, not avoided, not sterilized. The messiness needs to be embraced. We're in a moment like that now. So I'm going to say that to start, and I'm also going to say this. Part of what I'm seeing happen in real time is a form of psyops, a form of what the military used to call asymmetric warfare. They don't use that term as much nowadays, apparently. I've been reading up on what the military does, right? But they use the term asymmetric warfare. They used to use the term asymmetric warfare to describe precisely what is happening now with um, the uh, the deployment of the term anti-Semitism to start actively coming for people. So not at this point, it's more than just a kind of ideological trick. It's more than just a kind of rhetorical ploy. It's actually what one could refer to as a direct form of waging war in the context of asymmetric war. And this is a kind of extra state asymmetric war. That's what asymmetric war is, by the way. It's when war is waged by organizations and people that are not necessarily part of the military or part of the state. So you have this Institute for the Holocaust, so the IHRA. The IHRA infamously has this definition of anti-Semitism. It is now being adopted by various organizations, from universities to public schools to city councils, and it is being used as a way to directly repress political activity and, frankly, to repress thought. So everything that, by the way, everything that has created this moment that how many of us are here right now? Like something like 90 of us are here, right? This 90-ish of us are here. This is by definition what we're doing here is anti-Semitic. Just so y'all know, right? If we were in an institutional context that had fully adopted the IHRA's definition of anti-Semitism, then we would be in violation. So that's what I'm talking. It's more than just a rhetorical ploy. It's actually a way of engaging in the work that a lot of us understand through other terms like COINTELPRO, right? COINTELPRO did similar things by way of the FBI and J. Edgar Hoover. So when you look at what the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance is doing and the way it's circulated through the Anti-Defamation League and all these other organizations, the way in which there's an exception around the genocidal settler colonial practice, not just ideology, but the practice of Zionism, then what we're talking about is a kind of sweeping apparatus that is genocidal in its form, genocidal in its conduct, genocidal in its context. And I got some other things that I'll talk about, but let me start there and see if y'all want to think about anything together.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if you might talk a little bit more about both things you brought up. So one is, in our last conversation, you and Connie and I talked about this sort of the framing of violence. And I think there's a relationship between the framing of violence and nonviolence in these contexts and in the conversation we're having around abolition. So I wonder if you wanted to talk more about Fanona, and you wanted to talk more about how violence itself is getting framed similarly as is anti-Semitism, as you said, this sort of asymmetric use of ideas and frames and terms that then, are meant to sort of enclose or contain people, their counterinsurgent anti-revolutionary measures. So it seems like there's a connection between the use of violence and the use of anti-Semitism in this sort of attempt to shut down. And that's statist and not and sort of collusion through citizens of states, but it's relevant to Biden's recent efforts to suppress speech, and certainly experiences we had with our administration trying to put together this event.
Yeah. So let me say a couple of things about this, and especially thinking about our last conversation, and particularly about what I understand to be the most urgent imperatives of the long abolitionist kind of tradition of praxis as it's been articulated throughout the Black diaspora of the Black diasporic rebellion, revolt, revolutionary struggle, and so forth. One of the foundational connections between different sites of liberation struggle is actually found in the unspoken ways in which kind of hegemonic communities of liberals, people who see themselves as on the side of justice, for example, people who see themselves as on the side of freedom and civil rights and even self-determination. So they're liberals in the sense that they believe that those things can be done without like a really foundational disruption of existing systems. So like they think that somehow it's magical thinking. Liberalism to me is magical thinking, right? So we'll like move from that understanding that liberalism is a kind of deadly magical thinking. It's not innocent magical thinking. But the things that liberalism has in common in this particular context, and thinking about Gaza, and then thinking about the constant imperative, the kind of compulsory imperative to condemn Hamas before you can talk about anything else, right? The imperative to prioritize the mourning of Israeli civilian life before you can mention Palestinian existence. Okay, that's compulsory at this point. It's a requirement. I'm talking about among liberals. I'm not talking about the right wing. I'm talking about among the spectrum of liberals, from the kind of mushy center to the progressive left. This is compulsory. Okay, so what does this mean about liberalism? Well, what I'm going to say is that in periods of insurrection and revolt, in which oppressed, incarcerated, occupied peoples, including the recent what do you call it? Experiments of insurrection that happened throughout North America, right? That were pivoting on a deep and radical confrontation with the foundational anti-Blackness of the nation state, whether it's Canada, the U.S., or something else, right? And I'm talking about nation state, local government, whatever, police departments, all right? You saw a similar kind of thing happen, sometimes within the movements, and oftentimes pushed by people who understood themselves to be militants, right? But it was a kind of compulsory attachment to what I'm going to call an unnamed pacifism, not tactical nonviolence, right? But an unnamed pacifism. So it's in periods like this of both accelerated occupation and militarization that is tantamount to immediate genocidal activity and revolt, in which pacifism tells on itself. In other words, it reveals itself. The delusions of liberalism reveal themselves. And part of the delusion is fueled by this unspoken pacifism. And by pacifism, what I'm talking about is a kind of belief that people who are oppressed need to adhere to a particular kind of script when they engage in resistance, right? That militant resistance and militant desire and struggle for freedom, liberation, and really just to repulse an occupier. All right. So like the definition of colonialism is, of a certain version of colonialism means that you are occupied. So part of what happens is that there's a struggle and there's conflict and there's disagreement. But one of the imperatives for occupied people is to try to calculate how to get rid of an occupier, to stop the occupation. If we look at the historical sweep of how how at least momentarily successful revolts against occupation and apartheid have worked, that has meant a certain kind of messiness of violence in which people die. There's guerrilla actions that get taken. People call it terrorism now. What's interesting is this as well, actually, when we talk about the condemnations of terrorism, I think hopefully people here are on the same page that, we all hopefully recognize that, yeah, Hamas gets called terrorist. The work that the Israeli state in conjunction with the US state is not called terrorist, right? That's just self-defense, whatever the fuck that means, right? So we already, hopefully we can kind of just agree on kind of the incompatibility and hypocrisy of that distinction. However, I want to trace it back and think about, that period in the 20th century when there were kind of ongoing global anti-colonial struggles, revolts, and revolutions that involved guerrilla warfare, involved all various forms of struggle and counter struggle to try to eradicate occupation, to try to eradicate colonial relationships. Guerrilla warfare was obviously a central part of how people undertook that because, colonized people were vastly underarmed, vastly under-militarized compared to these dominant powers. So they engaged in guerrilla warfare. During that period of time, the notion of terrorism was just understood to be a tactic. It didn't have this thing attached to it that's happened over the last 50 or 60 years, in which it's automatically attached to, brown, Arab, Muslim, especially Palestinian resistors, regardless of whatever their ideological position is, regardless of whether they're part of Hamas or a different organization. So it's to say that when we think about the violence of an ordinary condition, then part of what the kind of ideology and the magical thinking of pacifism does is it deludes one into believing that you can prescribe to the oppressed formula and limitations for how they are allowed to undertake their own liberation, right? And you're also allowed to kind of judge how their own internal contradictions and struggles play out, which is also what we are seeing in Gaza and Palestine. I'm tired of having to remind people, others have said this, but what's happening in Gaza right now, it's what they would call under the war crime statutes, it's called collective punishment, right? You have one particular organization that undertakes a military activity that the world's calling terrorism, killing Israeli civilians, taking hostages, etc. And now the entire population is being held responsible for that by way of a genocidal military activity. So I think pacifism usually hides itself, but I think there's ways it is telling on itself. So as educators, as people who think analytically, who think pedagogically, and who think militantly, we need to name the pacifism. And here's the last thing I'll say about this point. I'm actually all right with it in a way if people will just admit it, right? Like if people will just admit that they're pacifists. If people will just admit they're pacifists, then you're actually telling me that we're talking about capacity building, right? Then what you're telling me is that our capacity building is going to be very limited. Okay, but let's be honest, right? If you're telling me you're a pacifist, it means you are not going to defend the people who are in the street trying to push back against the anti-blackness of the state by destroying property and destroying police stations, right? I know you're probably not going to defend that, right? I will defend that. I'm not a pacifist. I try to kill the pacifist that's inside of me. The state that's inside of me is whatever. That's haunts me all the time too. But I try to kill the pacifist inside of me. And one way I can do that is to tell you, I will defend the right of people to experiment militantly, including experiments in violence, because that is what the historical text teaches us. The archive teaches us. There's no escaping those experiments and the messiness of the mistakes and the failures of those experiments, the atrocities that happen, usually internal ones, with those experiments, right? I'm saying that's what we need to understand. Let's just call out the magical thinking and let's get the pacifists to admit they're pacifists. That way we can be on the same page about what our limitations are together.
Yeah, I so appreciate how just always brilliantly you help us all sort of articulate and therefore better observe all the complex dynamics. I wonder, you brought up this sort of international law and collective punishment, and I wonder about that tension and messiness. So I wonder if you can help people think about how, if we're anti and decolonial and we're understanding these multinational organizations, a part of the colonial project, a part of the long genocidal project, how do we then think about engaging with their laws? So, you're resisting the quote unquote Israeli state in all it's done and this current genocide, but then we mobilize, international law. Where are those tensions, and are there ways to help people on this call think beyond that, to kind of resist, again, the magical liberal humanitarian international bodies?
Yeah, we got to understand the UN as a fucking cop. That's what the United Nations is. These international bodies, they are a police body, which means you have to deal with them as a police body. So I'm not saying that to be cute. I'm saying that that is like part of a strategic framework. So to say that there are moments where you have to deal with, if you're talking in certain circumstances that we can give specificity. We can talk about specific examples all day, but there are specific situations in which, your people, your community, your collective, your organization, whatever, you might be forced into a kind of negotiation with these bodies, including police bodies, right? Especially if they're, if in the case of Gaza, if what you're trying to figure out is how to instigate at least a momentary ceasefire so your people can fucking live, all right? So it's a defensive stature, but that's the nature of guerrilla war too, okay? So there's no shame in that. It's just a recognition of the situation. So these international bodies, they are police bodies. They're literally there to police a global order. We see it play out consistently. They're not on the side of liberation. They're not only not on the side of anti-colonialism, they're against it, and they'll appropriate the terms of decolonization to fight off anti-colonialism. So that's the distinction I wanted to draw conceptually for us as teachers and educators. I think that we need to have a necessary distinction between anti-colonialism and decolonization. Anti-colonialism is a moment of destructivity, right? Anti-colonialism means you are destroying the colonial apparatus. That's what anti-colonialism is. And depending on who you read and who you attach yourself to, anti-colonialism is the condition of possibility, is the precursor for whatever the fuck it is that we're going to call decolonization. The problem is that people want to skip that step. I'm being somewhat simplistic, schematic, but not that simplistic or schematic, right? If people want to skip the step of, again, the messiness, the violence, the suffering, the misery, and also the joy, the beauty, the collective militancy, the emboldenment, what I'm saying? The feelings of invincibility that come from the anti-colonial struggle. They want to go right to decolonization. You know what? The UN is happy to do that. You know what I mean? The World Bank is happy to do that. Fucking Microsoft and Chevron, they're happy. They would love to work with you on decolonizing all kinds of shit. The university, nobody loves decolonization more than the university, not to mention academics, right? So I'll say, as far as our pedagogical work, our strategic and organizing work, to treat these international bodies as a police apparatus is to treat them as, they're there to work as a kind of leverage point for immediate things that you might need to survive, to stave off destruction. They're not going to be the kind of body that you go to for reparation or whatever you want, for reparation, for liberation, whatever. It's no different than dealing with a prison administration, like when incarcerated people go on strike. Right, they oftentimes will. The point of it is to deal with the prison administration. They're under no illusions that the prison administration is going to let them out of prison, at least most of the time. Most strikes that I've studied, anyways, right? And so, there's a recognition of that. So when incarcerated people strike, whether it's Pelican Bay, whether it was the ones in Georgia, whether it's the nationwide ones that have happened over the last 10 years, there's a recognition. This is the prison administration we're dealing with. There are certain negotiations that we can have with them to try to make more room for ourselves so that we can survive these hellholes of state prisons. There's no delusion that these are going to be the administrations that free us. Okay. Same thing with universities, although I think there's less of a recognition that university administrations are not going to free anybody. They're not going to meet the standard of liberatory and anti-colonial work, much less authentic decolonization. So I think we need to take that analysis forward. beyond just internationalized, we need to take that support into universities, school districts, et cetera. The administrations are there to retain order. And as I've been saying for the last few years, since I've been involved with the Count South Campus movement, university and college administrations in particular are usually the chiefs of the chief of police, right? So it's not even an abstraction. They're actually the police chief is a direct report to the university president or chancellor. So treat them that way. That's why I tell my friends and colleagues that I work with, is like, stop like hoping that folks in the administration are going to have your back or somehow like be on the side of liberation. There's like, even if they're your friends, it's like they know, they will tell you if they're honest with you that like, yeah, my job is basically to be a fucking warden or like an assistant warden. I think that brings a lot of kind of clarity to the way that we think about capacity building. And it also demystifies a lot of that kind of magical liberal hope that that we sometimes catch ourselves in, even if we call ourselves something else than liberal.
Yeah. And I want to say here, you've spoken and written about this brilliantly, the piece on the Ford Foundation, this sort of like dastardly DEI installation of Black and brown administrators who will speak equity and justice, but will do the cop work. And this sort of, I think, mind fuck for students in particular. Faculty, I feel like, shouldn't be that dumb. But students get confused, and it's a real travesty. I also don't really want to spend a lot of our time talking about it, because I think it's one of the ways we recentering the university pulls us away from just using the university to do the kind of work you've been doing your whole life. And I want to keep us there with that work. I want to ask you if I'm sure that people on this call are interested in thinking about that anti-colonial work, sort of what is that that moment or that possibility right now. I'm looking here to see what you called it, the sort of destroying the colonial apparatus is the moment where you create the condition of possibility. That's what it is. How can people on this call think about being in this moment of creating together a condition of possibility? What is this sort of anti-colonial call of the moment? I heard you say clearly, and I want to repeat, people need to study like that and
yes,
go to the Fanon and all of that. And
you know what, you just named it. So Sabina, you just named it, and I'm hearing this, by the way, so I'm following the lead of my Palestinian comrades who've been involved in the struggle for years. I feel Palestinian youth movement, Palestinian feminist organizations, et cetera. So folks that I'm close to and that I really deeply trust in their guidance. And what a lot of folks are saying to me and others, so I'm gonna say to y'all, is that they're calling for as much knowledge production and circulation and teach-ins just like this, actually. They're saying do as much of that work as you possibly can right now, right? Because it's a major front in this ongoing kind of colonial and genocidal occupation and so-called war. I'm not sure if it's really a war, but it's also a front in trying to create room for actual liberation struggle and anti-colonial possibilities. Part of that is to just name what is happening, and you see that the other side, right, the side that is accustomed to Zionism going unnamed, right, Zionism being the exceptional political ideology that can never be critiqued because it's conflated with anti-Semitism, which thankfully a lot of our anti-Zionist Jewish comrades, liberation warriors and friends are consistently directly challenging. I think the thing that we can do is precisely more things like this. And the side of Zionism recognizes how effective this is because they're trying to stop it. And they're trying to retaliate against those of us who engage in these conversations in an unapologetic and militant and very clarifying way that understands analytically and rhetorically what the stakes are, right? So I think, so they're freaking out. They're scrambling. Like the ADL, Anti-Defamation League, like a Zionist organization, they're sending directives to all kinds of organizations and administrations around the United States, like telling them, here's how you deal with it when people are saying solidarity with Palestine, right? So I think the more we can engage in direct analysis, kind of knowledge circulation and teaching about what Zionism is as a genocidal ideology and platform and kind of vision of colonial occupation, which is what it is, has nothing to do with the Jewish faith. The Judaism has nothing to do with that. And the more we can articulate unapologetic solidarity with Palestinian existence at this moment, right? Hopefully, we can get to Palestinian liberation. I'm saying Palestinian existence, because that is the stakes right now. Palestinian existence is the stakes right now. And again, the side of Zionism is trying to criminalize unapologetic solidarity with just the bareness of Palestinian existence. All right. So like I'm following the lead of my colleagues and comrades who are saying we need to be saying that collectively, consistently, unapologetically. And you know what? Tactically too, because some of us can take the hit that's going to come from all this shit like more than others. So I'm down for that. Like I'm down to take that. I actually take a lot of joy in being the target of some of this stuff. I really do.
Yeah, exactly. And there are those of us who should. I think you said so many things. One thing I want to repeat for everyone is that you said several times, I'm following the lead of Palestinian colleagues, of Palestinian organizers. And I think this is a conversation I've had with so many people, with some people who are on this call. You know, when we go to a rally, we don't add our little twist to the chant. They chant, we chant back. It's an absolute response. When people ask us to repost, we repost. We don't add a paragraph. And I think this is such an important point for academics in particular, that we have to both step up and step aside so that we're following the lead, doing what we're asked, and not always needing to add our piece to it. And I think that's following the practice that's as old as rallies themselves, right? One person calls through the megaphone, the rest of us repeat. And I think if we can do that in all of these ways, if we're being asked to do these things, to do what we're being asked, and I think it makes space. I mean, I know, like, I got shadow banned because I think I was never on social media before, and so then all of a sudden, so, you know, it's easy to find me. So then don't post about anything else, right? So if we're posting about other things and our Gaza or Palestine posts are getting shadow banned, then it just looks like nobody's posting and everybody can feel like nobody's posting. So it seems like there are these collective ways we can do really basic following of the lead, as you said. But I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, I mean, I know my time with y'all is almost up, but let me just say one thing in preparation for immediate preparation, something that I think teachers and of all kinds need to get behind. Something called the Holly Amendment passed last week in the Senate. It's a resolution, so it's legally binding, but it is kind of intended to be guidance. And what it essentially is doing, it's setting things up for a selective kind of persecution and prosecution of people that are engaged in pro-Palestine and Palestine solidarity work, and especially Palestinian students and Palestinian people generally inside the United States, right? So I think all of us need to prepare strategies and we need to establish networks of communication with Palestinian students, teachers, staff people at the places that we work in our communities. Because SJP, Students for Justice in Palestine in particular, is a target of this. I think we are looking down the barrel of various police collaborations and probably administrative collaborations as well that are going to begin to essentially kidnap and arrest SJP students. I think that is on the immediate horizon. I think there will probably be like an experimental test of trying to do that to a particularly militant SJP organization somewhere. And I think the intent is for it to metastasize and to start becoming a kind of a regular practice. Not unlike, what has happened in COINTELPRO with what they did to the Panthers and other organizations, not unlike what happened after 9/11 in various communities and whatnot. So, these things they're different, right? But I'm saying that the technologies of criminalization and kidnapping are deeply related to each other. So I think we're looking at that. I think we need to prepare for that. We need to look at that and have a way to talk about it now in preparation, in anticipation, and to do it publicly, to whatever extent you want to interpret my term public, but to do it openly, maybe I should say, to do it openly. So we need to share this awareness, this knowledge, and mobilize. I think it's about that kind of mobilization right now.
I know that you are at American Studies and have to go. We've kept you 5 minutes past time, and I really appreciate you wrapping us up with thinking about mobilizing for others and being collaborative. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you
Hey,
always.
Sabina, so I want to say I love you very much.
I love you
And thank
too,
you.
Dylan. Yeah, thank you. I just you're amazing.
Yeah.
We're
Thank you for
lucky.
giving me some. Hey, I'm sorry for taking extra time, but
No.
hopefully y'all can go a little bit. Okay, so by the way, I'm gonna post my email real quick before I log off, so folks can hit me up if they need
Great.
to.
Great. We appreciate
Okay,
your
there it is.
thank you. Thank you so very much.
Oh,
Thank
my
you.
bad. I typed it wrong. I typed it wrong. Sorry.
Thank, thank you all for
There it is.
joining
That's right.
us.
Thank you. All right, I'll talk to you soon.
We'll see you on Monday at 2. Take good care, Dylan.